So welcome everybody to AAI for an event that I'm really excited to be hosting with three extremely distinguished retired senior military officers to talk about early childhood. Before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping items. If you can please make sure to turn your phones silent. This event is being live streamed. We often these days have hundreds of people watching online. And then it will be posted online after the event is concluded today. And we are monitoring questions on Twitter, so please send your questions in, whether you're here or watching us online. I'm going to begin by introducing our panelists. On the far end is Admiral Gregory Johnson, who was commissioned in 1969 and designated as a naval aviator in 1970. He was promoted to Rear Admiral in February 1995 and spent another 9 years in service to the U.S. Navy, culminating as commander of U.S. naval forces in Europe and Africa, and Joint Force Command in Naples, Italy. General Craig McKinley is the first National Guard officer to achieve the rank of 4-star general. He spent 38 years in service to the U.S. Air Force, including as the 26th Chief of the National Guard Bureau. General McKinley then served as president of the Air Force Association and is currently national chair of employer support of the Guard and Reserve. And finally, Congressman Jack Bergman was sworn in as a U.S. representative for Michigan's 1st Congressional District on January 3rd, 2017. He spent 4 decades in service to the United States, retiring from the Marine Corps as a lieutenant general in 2009, and is the highest ranking military officer ever elected to Congress. So thank you all very much for being here. This is really a privilege for us to have you here, and not a group that people necessarily associate with thinking about early childhood. So I'd like to begin by asking each of you to talk for a few minutes about what it is about early childhood that you're thinking is important enough to bring you here today. And on a personal level, what led you to your focus on this issue? So we'll start with you.
Well, Katharine, thank you very much. It's a privilege and honor to be here at AEI and with you and also with my colleagues here this morning. I come to this, was one of the easier decisions I made after I retired when Mission Readiness began to sign up and be a supporter of it. I come from a small rural state, but as on the basis of per capita, it has, after Montana and Alaska, the highest per capita participation in the armed forces of any of our states, and actually it's done that way back to the Civil War and Revolutionary War. It wasn't a state then. But anyway, one of the reasons why that is, it's rural and it's poor. And I went to public higher education, University of Maine, and a firm believer in it, and serve on the board of trustees for the University of Maine system, and trying to bring post-secondary education into the nooks and crannies of Maine as the best trip ticket out of those places. So I'm very interested in education. I think in the military, once you make general and flag officer, you begin to think of things strategically, more so than tactically day to day. And so you always look at problems from a strategic standpoint. And so I tied those pieces together: rural, poor, high participation in the military, education, and the job of mission readiness. And of course, we're talking about our seed corps now, the younger people, because eventually it doesn't take very long. Any of us who are in the grandparent stage of life know how quickly our children grow up and how quickly our grandchildren grow up, and they're out there in the big bad world. But are they properly prepared? And so we have to worry about that cohort group that we're going to draw our recruits from, And right now we have great difficulty in our country, a country that is blessed with richness beyond anything that most countries in the world can imagine, yet only 71% of the people who reach that cohort group are ineligible, so that leaves only 29%. But it's not just, there's no interest like self-interest, and we certainly think of that in terms of the people that we compete for, and we need to compete out of that 29% that are eligible. But it also means that if they're successfully competing to come into the military, they'll successfully compete in any other sector of the civilian society, and most importantly, they'll probably be good citizens. And I think that's an area of civility and citizenship that could use some work right now in our country. So there are any number of reasons why this is very important, and I think a lot has gone on over the last 10, 15, 20 years to study this in more detail. And we have a lot of formal programs beginning at about, when's Head Start, 4 years or 5 years of age, and then into kindergarten and all the formal schools. The sad fact is the foundation for any of those formal aspects of education to be successful, that foundation's already been laid in early childhood development and what have you, daycare. And so funding those programs and being a voice for them and being an advocate for them. There are 700 of us retirees that are part of Mission Readiness. We do this all as volunteers, but I think it's something that all of us, since we tend to think strategically, come to with a great deal of passion. And so the work that Dr. Stevens did, or the new study that's done here, Workforce of Today, Workforce of Tomorrow, the business case for high quality childcare, I think is profoundly important, and I'm delighted that Mission Readiness and AEI and Dr. Stevens have been able to come together and bringing this out into the public domain and to advocate for this in our communities, in our states, in my case back in Maine, and also, of course, importantly, here in Washington, D.C., and with our Congress. And of course, we're delighted to have a two-fisted supporter here, in the sense that former military, but also a congressman working up on the Hill to help us in this area. And in times of budget stress, which seems to be all the time, this is an area that doesn't have a loud voice, doesn't have a strong voice, and it's a very complicated social problem. It's tied into single parenting. In Maine, there are more children born every year to single parents than to dual parent families. It's tied into another thing that happens in rural poor states, the opiate addiction problems that we have. And so I'm delighted to be part of this event today, and the fact that we're working on this, I think, profoundly important strategic challenge that our nation faces, which has big impact on the military, but it has a big impact on all aspects of civil society. So thank you.
So just to clarify, if I'm not mistaken, what you're referring to is, at this point, 71% of young people between the ages of 17 and
Correct.
24 are not eligible for military service, for obesity, education failures, or drug or criminal record. Is that correct?
That's correct. And it's hard for people to imagine that. 71%
Are not eligible.
are not eligible to serve in the United States military. And so if they're not eligible to serve in the United States military, I don't think we have the highest threshold. We have very high standards, and we certainly don't want to have a force that would call into question the trust and confidence of the American people. But if 71% can't serve in the military, what other things and challenges will they have supporting larger civil society, and most importantly, being good citizens?
Katharine, thanks so much. I'm Craig McKinley, and I did have a 38-year career in the Air Force and spent some of that in the National Guard, which is a unique perspective in that the states, the governors of the respective states and territories manage those forces in peacetime. But it's great to be with Admiral Johnson and Congressman Bergman. We go back a long time, and it's great to be on the stage. And for you at American Enterprise Institute, to set this up and to have this time is most appreciated by, I know, all of us. Our Mission Readiness colleagues, 700 plus Flag and general officers do this because we love to continue to support our country and the missions that our former careers allowed us to have. And I'm eager to have the discussion and the frank discussion with the people in the room today. I grew up, first family member to graduate from college, grew up with Depression-era parents who couldn't finish because of financial reasons. And I was always taught, I had a stay-at-home mom, I was always taught the values of being a good citizen. It seemed to be natural, and I went to a small school in southern Minnesota, participated in junior ROTC, which is a way for young people to get exposed to things that are in the military, and then went on to Southern Methodist University on an ROTC scholarship. So it afforded me great opportunities. And I'm not saying it's for everybody, but for me, I owe a great deal to the system that allowed me to participate in the United States Air Force. I continue to serve as a fellow at the Tower Institute at SMU. And I'm also a commissioner on the Aspen Institute study that Governor Engler's working, which is kind of interesting in that there's a confluence of many organizations looking at early childhood interventions and education that are very important to bringing up children properly. So I look at, I guess I come to it from an interesting perspective. When you think about K through 12, that's really not what we're talking about today. We're talking about children in their formative years of 1 to 3, and probably no later than 5, having the opportunity to learn the social, emotional, academic pieces that will enable them to be successful members of our society. We've all been in the recruiting business. We've all had to rely on our systems of bringing young people into our respective services. It's not easy to be a recruiter in today's day and age. We all grew up under a different day and age called a draft or a conscription. We all were part of a force, post-Vietnam force, Vietnam, post-Vietnam force. And in 1973, the impetus to bring young people into the military is really gone. It's an all-volunteer force today. So it's important that we get the best and the most qualified young people so that we don't have to retrain. One program we had in the National Guard was called Youth Challenge, and Youth Challenge took high school dropouts and tried to give them those fundamentals that they could have learned much earlier in life and to make them productive citizens. And about 200,000 of those young people today have been brought back from high school dropouts to productive members of society. So it isn't too late even at the end of that youthful period of the teens, but it's more important to do it before age 3. So thanks again for the opportunity.
All right, my turn.
Your turn.
All right. By the way, on the high school baseball team, I batted third.
Okay.
Perfect, because I knew I had at least one or if not 2 people on base, and it was my job to advance them. And it gives someone sitting here a chance to reflect even if for a few minutes. But first of all, thank you, Katharine. Thank all of you for taking time this morning, because we're not here to discuss some light, non-essential topic. This is deep stuff. This is essential to our, not only our democracy, our society, our world. And Simon Sinek, the author, if you haven't read his book, Start With Why, I would highly recommend. And as I was sitting here listening to the Admiral and the General talk, I said, why? What do I have to offer this conversation? And then I realized that there's only one way to get experience, and that's to live life and get the experience. So 40-some years ago, after coming back from Vietnam, I was a flight instructor in Pensacola, Florida, working on as well as flight instructing, there was a cohort of us, mostly Naval Academy grads, who figured whether we stayed in active duty or got out, it would be a good idea to have an MBA. And so we all went to school at night for 1.5 years, got our masters, and then some of us got out, some of us stayed in. But the point of bringing that to you is that my chosen subspecialty at that time was organizational development within my MBA program. I've been studying organizations, bureaucracies, societies, anything that you would consider organized, families, tribes, our organizations for over 40 years. So what I'm probably going to give you today, you're going to look at, where did he come up with that? Well, I've been looking at this for 40 years. But to bring it to a point in time, about 30 some years ago, I was literally sitting on a why would I remember this? I have no clue. I was sitting on a United Airlines flight, and I pulled out the magazine from the seat back in front of you, and it was a 3-page article in there about childhood development, written by a professor from Tulane. Now again, I have no idea what his name was, but I can guarantee you, if you look back into the early, mid-'80s, there was an article. And what he said was, the sooner a child realizes that they are not the center of the universe, the more quickly they develop. Well, how does a child realize that? If everybody standing around that child says, oh, you're the best, you're the greatest, well, they realize it because they have a relationship, a nurturing relationship with someone, mom and dad, family member, care, whatever, care provider, whatever it happens to be, that helps them develop right from that beginning age, where literally they have just come out of the womb, if you will, and are being held by someone. Being the grandfather of 8 beautiful grandchildren, by the way, we're sophomores in high school. My wife and I are for the 3rd time. Okay, ourselves, our kids, now our oldest grandsons are sophomores in high school, down to the age of 8. That's the range. So now I'm looking at the world through the eyes of a grandfather. And but for you guys, you don't know how good a parent you've been until you see how your grandkids turn out, because that will tell you then what you imparted to your children that they passed along to theirs. But we have a responsibility as American citizens, as people who care deeply. And General McKinley mentioned about being the first one in his family to graduate from college. I was the first one in my family to graduate from high school. Just to give you Depression era parents, the same thing, because you had to earn a living. Education was a part, but at some point it stopped. But anyway, it is what it is. Our expectations today may be different, but our path to enable the young children of today to get to where we are blessed to be. We know, sitting here looking at life from this level of experience, it's not a path that you can chart out in any course, with the exception of the fact you can't give someone too much love. You make sure that with that love, there's a modicum of discipline to make sure that they understand when we all have the ability to get off track. The military is pretty good at getting some fine young service member who just maybe had a bad day. We call it the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Yeah. We can just have some fun with them as leaders. And I know, I see these guys smile, and there have been times, I won't speak for others, but I have personally scared the bejesus out of people for their own good. It was just a good old chewing out, so to speak. But boy, they snapped to, and away we went. But the idea is that works at a certain age. The developmental side, that early age, again, right out of the womb, we have to accept what is different within our society today. With the in some cases, single parent household, everybody's working. Who's giving the nurturing to that young infant, and it starts right there. So my passion as a congressman, among other things, is to ensure that at the federal government level, at the congressional level, that we do everything we can to ensure that the states and other entities who are working in conjunction with the states provide that opportunity at that early developmental level. So I'll just stop at that and say I'm just glad to be here with you today, and let's open it to questions or whatever we're going to do next.
So one of the things that's, my background is actually in K-12. I worked in K-12 for 15 years, worked with low-performing New York City schools for 10 years. and frankly did not pay any attention to early childhood, which to some extent was appropriate because my job was K-12. I've been here now at AEI focused on early childhood for a little over 3 years and am as excited about it as you guys are. And you've raised some elements of this strategic kind of organizational development, sort of what are the foundations of society and how do we take a strategic approach to laying those correctly. One of the things that struck me in the last couple of years that I've been here is that education is really about human development. In our society, over the last maybe half century, we've come to equate education with schooling.
SAT scores.
Right?
Graduation rates.
Whereas human development of children is a birth to 18 plus process. Because of that, we've developed this very narrow way of seeing what we think of as education, and are missing what you guys have been talking about as the most critical stage of that. And in fact, our K-12 system is predicated upon a world that we don't have anymore. So as I was mentioning earlier, in 1940, only 1 out of 10 women with children under age 6 was in the workforce, and today that's close to 7. So early childhood, those very earliest years, starting at birth, have always been crucial. However, early development was, for most of actually human history, accomplished in the home, primarily through full-time maternal care. And then after the early development has been completed, then children can walk off to school. In the olden days by themselves, probably when they're 5. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that. Is that something that you think people are beginning to grasp, or do you think that it seemed to me that we've gotten so locked in thinking that education means schooling from age 5 to 17, that it is putting blinders on in terms of how we're thinking strategically about human development in our society?
Well, I'll take a shot at it. I think I mentioned, I serve on the Board of Trustees for the University of Maine system, and of course that's post-secondary education. And we realize the shovel-ready product we get out of the K through 12 program isn't always shovel-ready for post-secondary education. In fact, most of it isn't. Speaking of Maine anyway, but I think that's true in most states. And we think within the state of Maine, we keep saying, well, we really should be talking about K through 20, postdoctorate too, as a system and the throughput through it. But the reality is, we shouldn't be thinking that as from birth to K through 12 through 20. And it's kind of an assembly line, but all of, PhDs, master's degrees, bachelor's degrees, high school diploma, success in elementary school, success in socializing skills and playing with your classmates in kindergarten, all of that rests on a foundation that starts between 1 and 3. And I think that part of it's been forgotten. It gets into the private homes. It presents all kinds of challenges and issues to how to go about it. And of course, it's going to cost money. And so I think we still ignore it far too much, is my personal take on it. And so I think this is profoundly important work, and the work that you all are doing, I suspect by just the fact that you're interested in here today, you're beating the drums in this particular area, and I think for us to be more effective and efficient, like in our state of Maine, there's huge arguments over the vast amounts that go into the K through 12, but what kind of output are we getting? And I think that we're looking at the wrong thing. We're never going to fix that output problem at that level, or even in the post-secondary, until we get to this foundational aspect of it.
I'll be very brief. I would say that I'm somewhat optimistic because AEI and others are looking very deeply into this subject, and I know from my other work that we have a commission report that'll be presented the end of 2018, which I think will articulate what we've all said and what we believe. But there are skeptics out there. There are skeptics who say test scores and graduation rates are our metrics for success, and the social, emotional parts of academic development, someone else has got to do that. Well, it's got to take everybody doing it. You talk about the family, the very important part of our system. It starts with family. And then if the family has an ability to let their children experience other forms of pre-K learning, that's important too. But we've got to have a strategic plan, which I think people are starting to come to grips with in this, first, second decade of the 21st century. It's not going to go back to the children of the 50s like we all were, that had very, different lifestyles than the young people of today. But I'm optimistic that people like you, Katharine, and others are taking a good hard look at this.
There are no shortcuts. This morning, riding the metro over here, there was a young lady standing across from me reading one of my favorite books, Malcolm Gladwell's The Outliers. And I just watched her read for a while. And as we got off the same stop right here at DuPont Circle. And I just said, "Excuse me, do you like that book?" She said, "I do." I said, "Well, just remember the 10,000 hour rule. For those of you who've read it, you'll know what I'm talking about. There are no shortcuts. You have to have 10,000 hours. And whether you talk about things like we did, which is flying and other things, it's, but the point is, there are no shortcuts when it comes to recreating a nurturing family type environment. Because if we accept the fact that the nuclear family has changed, whether it be, again, a single person raising, both parents working, that is not going to go back the way we were raised. It is not. Okay. So then if you accept what is different, how then do you create the developmental environment for those, again, young toddlers on up to enable them to get to where we've been blessed to have achieved and attained?
To get back to national security, I'm kind of a lone voice, but I think my colleagues would agree with me that it is ultimately a national security issue that we're talking about here. We're spending billions of dollars on defense innovation in Silicon Valley and things like that. We're looking for the third offset strategy. But what we've all grown up with saying is the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen and women, they're our most valuable asset. It's not the third offset, even though you will employ that. But we need our people to be extremely capable and be eager to be part of this larger society as civilians that I think this really touches on.
Yeah, and it actually occurs to me that there's all kinds of labor you can import, but military labor, it doesn't really work that way, right? So do you, to what degree are you finding that your peers, whether in the community, in the military, in the Congress, you're ahead of the curve? How far ahead of the curve are you? To what extent are people, is what you're talking about resonating?
Jack.
Well, this Congress, the 115th Congress, has a slightly increased percentage of people who served in the military at some level. I think we're about 18%, which is up a little bit. But when you think about when you think about how the military, and now we have less than 10% of the population who've ever served. We have about 1% in uniform at any given time, something like that, probably less. So we're dealing with the edge of the bell curve. And yet with that edge of the bell curve has got a tremendous amount of responsibility on their shoulders for the other, huge, percentage. We have a ways to go in Congress to understand generational decisions. And as a freshman congressman, and I had just happened to be the president of the freshman class of Republicans, and I didn't run for that. I missed a meeting and they elected me. But you know how that works.
You got there late.
Yeah, I did. And but the point is, it's about leadership. So but I want to brag on our freshman class in the 115th Congress, both Democrat and Republican, that we have some real leaders, whether they be military, law enforcement, business, education, medical, whatever it happens to be. And what I'm sensing amongst the freshmen, both sides of the aisle, is that there is more of a societal commitment. Because a lot of us didn't run just to get another career going. We came out of retirement or out of something we were doing to serve our country. So as General McKinley said, I'm positive, I'm hopeful, because there are good, strong people willing to stand up and say, you know what, it's not about me, it's about our country.
Yep. What about you guys? What is your read on people's?
I would agree. I remember 25 years ago, my sister, for Christmas one year, gave me this book called Bowling Alone, and by Robert Putnam. And he's done a great deal of work on this. We build our houses, the houses we grew up in had a porch on the front. Now we build a backyard and put a fence around it. And in Maine, we see this, rural and poor, the social fabric of our communities is it's a lot thinner than it was when we grew up. Your immediate family, your extended family, your church family, your school family, I was in a rural area, we had 4-H clubs. You had a million different families that looked out for you, and it was all part of growth. And I think people have gotten much busier. I don't know if they're inward focused, but it's not only individual aspiration, it's community aspirations, and the responsibility of the entire community for that community aspiration to get their young people ready to positively compete academically and what have you. And so I think we've gotten away from that over the years, and I think as the Congressman pointed out, he senses this, and with his colleagues that are coming in now, I do think we have a long way to go. So that's why I think this work that we're doing now is so profoundly important, and we've got to keep beating that drum, because so much, and as he also very wisely pointed out, we began to see how good we were as parents by watching our children with our grandchildren, and you kind of forget just how much work it is and how important that 1 through 3 time frame is, and whatever subsequent success they're going to have. The odds are, I think that curve is pretty steep. The more time that is spent in the 1 to 3 years, how much success they'll enjoy in kindergarten, in elementary school, in high school, and on into college, and most importantly in life. I sit on boards of companies. We have great challenges now. We have people that may be technically successful, but they have to be able to work on teams. They have to be able to think critically. They have to be able to communicate in writing and orally. And again, it doesn't matter how technical the skill, whether you're engineers, physicists, or in the humanities or social sciences. At the end of the day, you have to take kind of what you know, and then you have to meld it with those other soft skills to be successful.
Right. And the research is really exciting in this area, that the foundation for those kinds of soft skills is now, they think, developing in the first months of life. What you're talking about, that first interaction is what's laying the groundwork for these skills. And in fact, even success in kindergarten isn't going to be possible unless you have the skills to get along with others and focus on a task and cope with frustration and so forth.
I recently visited Washington State and the Tacoma school system, and from the mayor on down, it was about bringing these young people up to be productive citizens, noble cause. And what I took as a striking comment is he said, we want these young people to stay in Tacoma, because in many cities, these young people don't find any reason to stay. They leave, and there are these cylinders around the country where young people go. And he said, we've got to do this fundamentally to preserve our city and our state and the organization that we built up. So you could see it in all the teachers. They wanted those young people to go on to higher education if they could, but to come back and be productive members of society, right there in Tacoma. Very important.
So you know, I think there's a problem that we're having these days, in that it's very difficult to talk about policy without talking about politics. So policy really should be about strategies, right? It should be about figuring out what to do, and it seems as though we've conflated those things. So I don't really want to talk about politics. However, policy questions are crucial in this area, because what we're talking about requires policy. It requires good policy. It's going to require policy changes. One of the things I've written about is the crucial role of childcare in this picture. What we've been talking about here, what the science is clear about, is the way you improve outcomes for young children is you improve their early environments. And we know where children prior to age 4 or 5 are. They're either at home or they're in childcare. And a child who enters childcare as an infant, who's in childcare full-time, has been spent almost 12,000 hours in childcare by the time they get to kindergarten. And I've been arguing that that's something, daycare, something we've never really thought about, but in fact, those are the environments that are shaping children. I've been suggesting that is, childcare is actually America's most important early education program, and perhaps even America's most important education program, period. However, to make childcare environments developmentally and educationally good places for children is going to require policy changes. It's going to cost money. What I have been suggesting at the state level is that as we understand that education is a birth to 18 human development process, it is not equivalent to K-12, that state legislators have to start to think more strategically about how they are allocating their human development dollars. So really, most human development dollars currently are going to K-12. However, that's not necessarily, strategically speaking, the best use of all of our human development dollars. Now, that's a very radical thing to say, what I just said, and I appreciate you guys nodding supportively. But it seems to me that that's the kind of policy conversation we're going to have. I mean, I don't know if it's going to be possible for us to add a lot to the human development dollar pot. Or in my observation, that's going to be tough. I wish we could. At the same time, obviously there's some states that are spending quite a lot on K-12 already. There are other states that are spending much less. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well,
How you balance those priorities?
First of all, talking about this entire thing from birth to 20 PhD level, and then successful transition from the academic environment into the workforce as productive members of not only America's workforce, but also productive members of our society. Yep. I think talking about it in terms of human development instead of this segment or that might be a good start, and that it's a continuum. They're all part of the same area. In my state, just this past year budget with our state legislature, they put more into, they added to the huge amount that's already spent on K-12, K through 12, than the entire amount of the state appropriation to postsecondary education. And I don't think there's any really going in. There are probably some of the human development programs and what have you in the birth to 3 years, but I think very, very little. And so I think that might be a good way to start approaching it. And I think more prolific research in these areas, because I'm convinced, so you're speaking to the choir here, but how profoundly important that is, and everything else, and all those billions that we pour into K through 12, to get better output out of that is going to depend on what happens down there at the 1 through 3 area, I think. That's where you're going to get the greatest return on investment in this area.
And you mentioned earlier about devolving some of this out of Washington to the states and local community. I thought that was interesting. Would you care to share that with the group?
Well, I would, because when thank you. If you're the governor of a state, and you say, what are my sources of revenue? And you consider the federal government one of your sources of revenue, you've already limited your success, because there are no funding lines without strings attached. Now, we might do things one way in Michigan, and they might do something totally different in New Mexico. Okay? Both work, but not necessarily when you look at it from a federal platform with criteria. So you've already set yourself up with failure by making your decision point too high up in the chain. Where does your funding line emanate from? In the military, we train to the lowest levels, and we push leadership and decision-making down to the lowest levels, because there will never be anybody from higher headquarters out there when the stuff hits the fan. Yeah. Okay? And the same attitude when it comes, the federal government, it says right in the preamble to the Constitution what its roles are. Okay? Everything else should be left to the states. If you create that kind of environment where the states have control of their destiny, and then you at the federal level create an environment where the sharing of good ideas, this worked in Mississippi, this worked in the state of Washington, this worked here, maybe you guys in Florida or North Carolina should try it. That's where I believe that, because that's what we do in the military, whether you're squadrons or battalions, you create this positive competitive environment to see who can accomplish the mission better. And then that's how you go to the fight. And I think that's where we can make great strides here, saying, okay, states, don't rely on us, the federal government, for solutions in this area. You know that, for example, I'm going to use my district. In January, your challenges of childcare are going to be exacerbated because we have these things called snow and ice storms. That may not, Florida goes, what are you talking about? Mm-hmm. Okay? Just one small difference, but let the states, through collaborative efforts, where the federal government, I think, can say, okay, let's collaborate, but we're going to kind of stay back here, and you don't hold the funding stream over the heads of the states.
So Michigan, of course, says that it doesn't have any money. What are your thoughts on that?
I would suggest they find some. That's Governor Snyder. You know, you're in control of your state. That's nice. And as General McKinley would say, you're Title 32. Yep. You know, don't call the Air Force. Use your own your Air National Guard right there. Sure. So don't create the environment where if you're the governor, you're a leader. You're an elected leader. Stand up and lead. Otherwise, go home.
And I think teachers probably have figured this out. I don't know how many teachers are in the room today, but I bet on the simulcast there's thousands. They know this. They're out there. They're the front lines. And I think we need to have collaborations with the teachers unions, the local communities, the Boys and Girls Clubs, for example. There are a lot of private entities now that are putting people onto playgrounds to try to make sure playtime is as meaningful as academic time, so that there isn't bullying on the playground and they come bring it in the classroom. There are some real pros out there who understand kind of what we're strategically talking about. If we could, and I think AEI is really important here, bring this group together and create these bottom-up solutions, and states will compete against each other, just as we did when we were in the military organizations we were part of, to get the best practice.
So we have a few minutes for questions. There's going to be a microphone coming around. A couple of AEI question rules. Rule 1, please state your name and affiliation. And Rule 2 is please make sure that it's actually a question for our guests. Over there, and then over here.
Hi, Roy Krasinski, Save the Children Action Network. Talking about childcare and military, I've heard a lot about the success of the military child development program, the military version of childcare. I don't know if there's any expertise on the panel, but if anyone could talk a little bit about what makes that program so successful and what lessons could be learned from what the military is already doing and how successful their programs are.
I would say it's the advocacy of the military families through those child support centers. They're very involved. They're very active. They take a very deliberate role in those activities that their children partake in when they're on duty or deployed overseas. So I would say it starts again with the family and their interaction with the Family Support Center.
Yeah, I think if we do have an advantage, it is to the extent that the nuclear family continues to survive in the military, but it's the parental engagement in the whole process. And you're a little bit captured if you live on post and what have you, so those kinds of things help induce that kind of, but that's the critical thing.
Yeah, and I think if I believe that Roy, do you know the date? I don't remember the dates of the reform, but I believe there was actually a focused reform of the military childcare center, childcare system when the military started to realize that it was important, and we'd actually been thinking about doing an event on that. There's a woman who's still in D.C. who had overseen how to implement quality on a larger scale. Both in a short-term sense to serve current families and in a longer-term sense.
The term we use, family readiness, equates to combat readiness because with we saw this in the Desert Shield Desert Storm. The first conflict that we got involved in where it was on the internet. I mean, and everything was live, and our challenges with the families right then wanting to know, because they could see on TV what was going on. We knew that things had changed, so we had to change. This was in the early 90s, change our view of family readiness and family preparedness, which, goes right into that childhood piece.
The Military Child Education Coalition, too, is another group that, because our children move around so frequently, they get disadvantaged by going school to school to school to school. There are nonprofits out there who are trying hard to make sure that we level the playing field for all the military children, and military daycare is just part of that.
Hi, Susan Sclafani, longtime educator and policy person. My question is, how do we help politicians make the leaderly stand on this when fewer than 25% of their constituents are parents? This is a problem in all of our large cities in getting bonds passed and everything else. How do we get people to understand that it's in the best interest of the entire community to take dollars from other places and place them into childcare? I'd like our politician.
You're the stuck key on that one.
Any comment I would make would probably be used against me in a campaign commercial. But that doesn't keep me from making the comment. We are blessed to have been born in this country. We were blessed to have the founders have a vision and a dream. And unless we as individual citizens step up to tell our politicians, this is what's important, the politicians, the elected officials at any level, even your county commissioners and on up, or your school board members, will not get it. So, and I'm going to, Craig and I were talking at breakfast, and Katharine or whatever, and sometimes Craig's known me long enough to know that I maybe get out on the edge a little bit. But we currently have a situation going on in this country with the NFL. The point is, every citizen in this country has a vote on the NFL situation. In this case, you vote with your pocketbook. You decide what kind of behavior is acceptable to you and what isn't as an American citizen. I would suggest to you that same passion for what you don't like about what you see currently is that you take that into your local community and engage those who are running for office to say, these are the standards we will accept and nothing less.
Good answer.
Hello, my name is Patty Barron. I'm the Director of Family Readiness for the Association of the United States Army. I used to work for an organization called 0 to 3, and I'm currently on the board for Childcare Aware of America. So this discussion is incredibly important, and thank you so much for having it. I wanted to just kind of piggyback on the question about how to make lawmakers think about policy that helps our childcare situation in America. I'm wondering if you all have tied it to the workforce issue, because especially for moms that are going into the workforce, if they can't find quality, affordable childcare, many times they either opt for something that isn't very good, or they don't go into the workforce at all. Has there been any discussion around the connection between workforce and childcare?
You know, you brought up some interesting subjects earlier at breakfast about, mothers who are making a conscious decision to stay home until their child is 2 or 3. That's obviously a discussion that should probably take place. I know, having been part of a National Defense Industrial Association, that leaders of our aerospace industries are struggling to find highly trained, highly competent people to work. So I think there is an advantage to tie this to workplace environment and to have those companies who can afford these types of 0 to 3 centers would be very much in their interest to do that. So I think it's a great point, and that's the extent of what I would add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think even here, for example, among my AAI colleagues, there are kind of two competing priorities. One is recognizing that if it's true what we're all saying, that this could not be more important. When people are financially able to make the decision to stay at home, whether it is the mother or the father, for the first 2 or 3 years, I think that's a decision that, as you just pointed out, we need to be talking more about, right? And then on the flip side, my economist colleagues that are very concerned about GDP and so forth want to increase the workforce. However, it is the case that if there are private sector industries that recognize what a human sacrifice is being made for a mother to leave her young child, because they need that human resource so much, it does make sense for the private sector to help fill that gap in once we are recognizing what we're all here talking about. It becomes a strategic priority. And I think that's part of what is amazing about these guys is, number one, they're strategically brilliant, and number two, they're understanding how important this is from a strategic point of view.
The facts are that the United States, in terms of maternity leave, parental leave, what have you, of the advanced OECD nations, we have probably the least generous policies in this country. I don't know what that speaks to for sure and what the research will tell us about this, but I think there is something there probably.
Right. Well, I think it just in general is part of a picture, which is that we're at a point in our history where we're just about to remember how important this whole period of life is, which is something that for all human societies for all time have known, and we've just almost gone through, I think, a period in American history where we've kind of disengaged from those early years of life for various social reasons.
You know, I would suggest to you to kind of maybe cap off this question is the flying analogy, and I think it transcends any kind of it applies to how we make our decisions. As a pilot, when you realize a need to change your heading, your altitude, your power setting, whatever it happens to be, the sooner you accept the fact that you need to make that change, the smaller and more imperceptible that change is. The longer you wait, you still have to make the change, but it gets very violent if you wait too long. And I think as I look at the view of childhood development, parenting, being in the workforce, building your career, we realize now that we need to make some changes. The longer we wait, the more upsetting it's going to be to all concerned. And my concern is the ability of these young children today to have the tools they need to be just spectacular citizens of our great country. That's one of our primary jobs. You can't love them too much, and you can't give them enough examples. And by the way, let them fail early, let them fail often, very small, because when they get to the very important parts of their life, they won't fail.
I work with Dr. Jim Comer. He's a wonderful educator. He's been around a long, long time. He started this concept that we are discussing up here 40 years ago. He will tell you that it didn't take. So are we at that tipping point in our society where it will take? And I hope we are.
There's another aspect of this that's coming to light now too. At the University of Maine system, it's been about 15, 20 years now where 60% of the students in our system are female and 40% are male. There's a lot of, one of your colleagues here at AEI has written quite a bit about it, depends on which state, but it's 15 to 20% of the male workforce in America has voluntarily taken themselves out of the workforce, and they aren't there. And so this ties into this whole thing. I think it goes back to the nurturing thing that we're probably, hopefully, starting to reinvent. In Maine, that also ties very much into the single parent equation, ties very much into the opiate addiction challenge that we have. And we have a workforce in Maine that is essentially fully employed, but we have tens of thousands of jobs going unanswered. And so all of these things are coming together. And in the defense industries, the companies I sit on the board of, we have an incredible challenge to find the workers, and that competition is intense here in this area. So all these confluence of events, I think, are starting to give people pause, and we need to start thinking about this. And I think all of this will help us converge on some solutions here.
So we're just about out of time. Do you have any last thoughts, comments you want to share?
Thanks for being here, because if we don't have these kinds of conversations and expand these conversations, then we're not doing what we know needs to be done for the future generations. So thank you.
I'd just like to add my thanks too. I'm pleasantly surprised by how many of you came out this morning. Trying to get over here from across town, I applaud all of you for putting up with this traffic every day. Now I know why I live back in Maine. But anyway, I really appreciate it, and I think it's going to take all of us. It's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of focus, and I thank you. And by the mere fact that you're here, I know you all have some passion for this particular topic. Thanks.
Katharine, thanks to you and AEI and Mission Readiness. It's been a pleasure to be here. And you don't want to put too fine a point on it, but we are, I believe, at that tipping point where if more people pick this up, it just makes common sense to say this is what we need to do to change. And our society is capable of change, and it's a great country. And so thanks to you and AEI for this time.
Well, it's been an incredible honor for me to share the stage with you three. Thank you very, very much. Please join me in thanking our guests.
Thank you. It's a wrap? Okay.
Thanks.
Great.